Welcome back to the One Way Podcast, where we explore the art, science, and spirit of martial training. Today, Grandmaster Olds and I are diving into a topic that every instructor, no matter their style, needs to master, and that is leveraging your environment. Whether you're teaching in a traditional dojo, a retreat center, a backyard, or a crowded gym, your surroundings can either limit you or unlock new dimensions of training. So, sir, to kick this one off, how would you define environment in the context of martial arts training, and why does it matter more than people think?
Well, I think the environment that you train in is going to determine how you perform in
Hmm.
a self-defense environment. So if you're training on really nice mats, then that's your experience. And let's be honest that when you're out there on the street wearing your street shoes and you're moving around on asphalt or in the forest with sticks and leaves, it's going to be a very different experience. So being mindful of your environment can be a powerful tool for developing your training and making sure that you're meeting up with the needs of reality.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that matters much more than people think. I think most people assume that if you can do a nice skip roundhouse kick on the mats, that skill is going to translate to the street. And,
Hmm.
if you're on asphalt, yeah, you could probably do a skip roundhouse kick, but I definitely wouldn't try to do a skip roundhouse kick on wet grass,
Yes, sir.
so
Yes, sir.
it does really matter a lot.
It makes me think, at the youth center right now, we've kind of gone back and forth. We recently, in the summer, have opened our rec room up again because it's warm enough to get in there and start moving around. And um, it's like a concrete slab of a floor, and it's not like really jagged or anything, but we've been going in there barefoot just trying it out, and it is very different, when you're on the mats at the dojang. Falling doesn't really seem like a big deal, especially once you've learned how to fall. But we were working today on some grappling things, and the people I was working with, they said, it was like, what's going on? And they were like, we're just really nervous about stumbling and falling in here. And I was like, yeah, me too, a little bit. It's like I definitely don't want to fall on the concrete. So we had to adapt to that, just hardness of floor. Just that different foundation that we were on there. And I've been thinking about this a lot, and so I'm glad we're talking about this today. Um, as an instructor, to kind of dig into this question a little bit more, it says, why does it matter more than people think? I think with other sports, there is a field of play, right? You go out to the soccer field to play soccer, you go to the basketball court to play basketball, tennis court to play tennis, and everything's kind of specially designed to happen in that environment. But with the martial arts, as you said, you could be anywhere in the world. You could be in an elevator, you could be, driving your car, you get like whatever. And so I think, especially in martial arts training, your environment, as you said, plays such a huge role, and it can totally change your perception of reality when it comes to defending yourself. And
Well, it's why getting outside your comfort zone and exploring different
yes,
environments is really important. The retreat, is coming up in just a few weeks, really, in about a month.
yes, yes, sir.
And that one of the kind of unspoken benefits of the retreat is that ability to train on many different surfaces and many different kind of environments. And that's going to help people grow in a lot
Mm,
of ways. I remember the first time I started training on the grass a lot when I was back in college. Because of the nature of that club, we didn't have good spaces to work out in. So we were either training on carpet with tables and chairs kind of
yes,
cramping
yes,
our
sir.
style, or we were out on AstroTurf next to the track, which was insane, trying to pivot on that. And, or we were on wet grass and slip sliding around, or we were in a racquetball court that was so noisy I could barely hear what anyone was saying. So it was almost my depth, my perception was like kind of screwed up. So I but I think all of those experiences helped me grow and develop as a martial artist. And I think the same diverse makeup of the retreat helps people grow and develop.
Yes. Yes, sir. I totally agree. Kind of speaking to that, there is such a we talk about the feel a lot, as instructors, but also as students, and just wherever you're learning and training, it can feel very different, not just because of the person who's in leading the class, but because of just where you're at. Um, what differences have you noticed in student behavior or learning when you teach in a formal dojang or studio as opposed to an outdoor or an unconventional space? Because we've had experience. I have
It's
you in both of those settings.
Well, I will say that in the tougher training gyms that I kind of came up through, or even my own programs that were teaching in kind of rough and tumble spaces, had more rough and tumble people. Their
Yeah.
mindset was like kind of, if you have this really beautiful space and very clean mats and everything is very polished, then people are going to expect everything to be perfect. So if someone gets hit a little too hard, or if somebody um, is feeling emotionally vulnerable and isn't addressed quickly, those kinds of little things can be overinflated in a really nice environment because everyone's
Mm,
expecting it to
mm,
be perfect. However, if the environment is like, well, there's just a couple of guys meeting after class, like in the park, and somebody kicks them a little too hard, they're like, well, I'm not expecting much. I don't, this isn't some big professional service that's being done for me. It's just a couple of guys training outside. So I think the environment really affects how people train, their expectations from training. I think it's very important.
mm, mm.
And it's why people should have a diverse environment. Like if you've only trained in a nice gym with mats under your feet, then come to the retreat and have some of that kind of experience.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It really does make a big difference. Even just taking your shoes off, like training with your shoes on versus training with your shoes off. It's like totally different. It feels so
Yeah.
different. And I think a lot of people maybe who are playing different sports might relate to that as like, go and play basketball barefoot, go and play soccer barefoot, go and play, whatever it is that you're playing. That can be a really simple thing to
Yes.
very quickly change your environment just by removing an accessory, like an article of clothing, like shoes or something. Um,
I was
so,
listening to
yeah.
something on the radio the other day, and they were talking about how, football or soccer is really big right now because it's got the World Cup,
Yes.
and so everyone's talking about this. And I think they were talking about indoor soccer and how typically
Mm,
it's been played on artificial grass, but now with some of the modern domed soccer stadiums, they're able to have like indoor grass, and it's causing some confusion. And some people really want the new grass, but it's a very different feel than artificial grass, so it's changing the way the game is played. And that resonated with me, and how different, martial arts can be on different surfaces. If I'm on a really sticky surface, like something that's like AstroTurf, I'm going to really focus on my punches. If I'm
mm,
on something that's really hard, I'm going to focus more on my striking than my grappling. If I'm on a softer surface, well, then grappling is going to feel a lot better for me to engage in. Um, if I'm on a slippery surface, I'm not going to be sliding around so much. If I'm on grass, grappling's great. It's slippery, and I might be able to take someone down easier, but just falling is not going to necessarily hurt me that much because the grass
mm.
is kind of cushiony, so
That
really can change everything.
that was something being up here in the snow this winter. There was just so much snow on the ground. I was like, man, I just want to like jump to the ground all the time.
Mhm.
Obviously got to watch out for ice and like all of it building up underneath. But just going and hiking in the snow, I was like, this is so nice. Like I'm not really afraid of falling into the snow, but then when it's hard packed ice, that's like sometimes worse than concrete because it's just bad. But as I was out there, we've kind of joked a little bit over the years about the winter retreat and just how different that would be, right? Like, man, all of this, but in the ice and the snow, that could be wild. Um, Kind of speaking of that, getting out into the ice and snow, I told you a story this past winter of jogging on a trail when there was still ice and snow on the trail and how different that was for
Mm,
me and how it actually, I mean, just like it always does, it got me in tune with my environment in a very different way because what I expected was not what I experienced. And what I expected was because I was running, my footing would be much worse. But what really happened was because I was running and taking heavier steps, I had better grip every single time my foot connected with the ground, as long as it connected in a way that made sense. And
mhm.
so I was running and I was like, oh, I'm actually like gripping more because of that impact. And that leads me into the next question. Can you share a moment when the environment unexpectedly enhanced a lesson or changed the direction of your teaching? Maybe something happened in the environment or there was,
Well, yeah, many
yes,
times. I mean, the first thing that came to mind was, at the retreat, we start every morning with a run up the mountain.
yes,
And
sir. Yes, sir.
when you tell people that, they think, okay, running up a mountain is going to be a lot harder than running on a flat surface. It's not going to be, um, the kind of, soft, or it's not going to be the firm ground that I'm used to running on, like a sidewalk or a road. And it's going to be high elevation training, so I'm going to have to be prepared to like lose my wind more. But what they don't think about and what you learn from that experience in the moment is how to be a billy goat.
Yeah.
Because you are running really fast and you're going up and down through these jagged, craggy trails, and there are roots and stones, and you got to get your foot in the right spot. And you have about 2 seconds to do so. And like you said, you have all this momentum coming behind you. And it's like you would never even think that what you were going to learn from high elevation mountain training was actually agility. You would think it was
Yes.
endurance. That's what everyone
Yes.
thinks. Like, oh, I'm going to run up this mountain. It's going to be endurance. And there is endurance to learn. But until you've actually done it, you wouldn't realize that it's a lot of agility training.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Oh, I love it so much. I said I mean, still to this day, that mountain run at the retreat taught me how to run. I was like, oh, I didn't realize that like this is what running was. And then I went and I did that. And now all of my running is in the context of running at the retreat because I'm like, it's never going to be that fun. Like it is just it's so fun. And um the other thing that I thought running at the retreat is just you're running and the branches are overhanging, in the trail, and you're like, I just have to go straight through them. And so like you finish the run and you're just like, like
Yeah,
not
and I
torn up,
think
but
some people, when they're confronted with that, they will immediately have a little bit of a panic and they'll say,
yes,
oh, this is dangerous. I'm going to twist my ankle or, break my leg or blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, you could. But you
you
could
could.
also learn something that you could never learn unless you were confronted with that adversity. And I've been doing it for most of my life, and I've never broken my leg
Yes,
or
sir.
twisted my ankle. So,
Well, that's the thing. This I don't want to get off on too much of a tangent here, but it is that permission to slow down every once in a while because people here run up the mountain and they think, all right, I'm sprinting, the entire time, or I'm just going as hard as I can the entire time. And I think there's something to be said about that. But if you try to do that the first time, you're definitely going to slip and fall. And so as I'm running up there, like you said, I'm taking those little 2-second gaps and I'm like, whoa, all right, I need to make sure my foot's in the right place. And like, I'm going to
yeah.
pull back a little bit on my speed and compensate with the agility. Um,
We're going to go off on a tangent here, but this is just reminding me how important it is that when kids are young to get a lot of rough and tumble play. Because
Yes.
and we talk a lot about that physical socialization, but it's more than just learning how to communicate with somebody else. It's also learning how to like communicate with yourself. Because running up that mountain when I was a kid, I was slip sliding everywhere and I was tumbling left and right and I was falling on my hands and whatever. But it didn't hurt me that much because I'm only a few feet off the ground. And it helped me develop this security with
Mm,
insecurity. I think a lot of people these days have very limited experience in that. And the experience they have, somebody's standing right next to them saying, now you be careful now. Now you
yes.
slow it down. You watch out for those roots and those jagged rocks. You're going to hurt yourself. And what's that do? That makes them fill with self-doubt
Mm,
and basically get nervous. I know for myself, I'm kind of afraid of heights. And I was told that you can tell you're afraid of heights when you get to someplace high and you start having this thought of like, I could just throw myself off and die. And whenever I get to a high place, my knees start knocking and I start getting kind of wobbly legged. And it's
mm,
almost like more dangerous because that anxiety that's coming out from that high spot. I think that's a sort of weakness that, I mean, obviously you want to be cognizant of how high you are and you don't want to throw yourself recklessly into situations that are super dangerous, but you also don't want to overthink them to the point that it causes you
yes. Yes, sir.
to be nervous because that's going to reduce your performance overall. And so, just like I need to get over my fear of heights, I think people need to get over their fear of going through those difficult, that difficult terrain. And it's something that you can only learn from being in that environment. To kind of bring this
Yes.
back on track, it's like that environment teaches you things that you never learn if you just ran on a straight path.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So bouncing off of that a little bit and how the environment will change the way that you as a student or as a learner interact with that. Um, how do you adapt curriculum when space is limited, crowded, or not ideal? We were just talking about running at the dojo or running,
Hmm.
on the street versus running on trails, and how there are certain adaptations you have to make and certain lessons that you will learn by making those adaptations.
What are some of your thoughts?
So when it comes to adapting curriculum, a lot of times at the retreat we're out in the field, quite literally in the field, and um, one of the things that I think about immediately is elevation changes, when we're working on weapons training and there's that added element of this is an uneven surface, right? I
Yeah.
am thinking as a student, I need to be really cognizant of my feet, but also, from an instructional perspective, you can leverage that environment and say, all right, if you have been on the downhill side of this engagement, let's switch. Let's make sure that you have the experience of being up top, or just using what you see really to inform what comes next. I think that, as you alluded to before, grappling on the grass is one of the most fun experiences ever. Like
Mhm.
it is so fun. And so maybe, the striking isn't, well, I don't want to say that because striking is really fun too, but like we're not going to like go into the rocks and like, and then do all of our grappling on the rocks. That might be more of like, oh, let's work on positioning and footing in this kind of thing, depending on what the environment is giving us. And
I think, yeah,
yes,
I
sir.
think you're onto something. I think one of the beauties of One Way and programs like ours that are very holistic and wide-reaching is that we can adapt our curriculum to the environment.
Yes.
So
Yes.
if we were on a gravel road, I would definitely work striking. And I probably would
Yes.
focus
Yes.
more on the punching than the kicking because I might kick up rocks into people's face. If I was on hard asphalt, I would definitely work on my kicks, and my punches. If I was on like something that's very sticky and hard, then maybe I'd have to focus more on my punches. If I was on something very slippery and soft like grass, I would work on my grappling more.
Mm,
That's a great experience in the grass. But it's a terror. It can be kind of challenging to work a lot of the fancy kicks. I- If it was dry grass, then I probably would work on my kicks and my punches. And if I
that's
fall down, it's not that big of a deal. And those different textures under my feet would potentially make me have to do my kicks and punches a little bit differently. Like you on gravel, I could pivot quite well. And I actually feel like I could kick, like I could do a lot of skipping motions and sliding motions pretty well on gravel. My only concern would be, maybe throwing some of that up in people's faces, especially
mm,
like a little bit more like sandy gravel. But I think that's something that you can only gain sort of a sixth sense about by trying to do those
mm.
things in those
That's
environments. So you could also say grapple on concrete,
yes, yes.
do kicks on really slippery surface because it's gonna it's gonna, teach you what to expect from that environment. And so when you're actually trying to defend yourself in that environment, you'll be more informed on how things are going to go down.
That's something that, like at the black belt level, really gets me jazzed up about, training is just like maybe at the beginning. Well, I don't know. There's a kind of this gray zone of innocence where like maybe at the very beginning, if my instructor was like, all right, we're grappling on concrete today, I wouldn't know any better. I'd be like, oh yes sir, let's do this. you know but then like after you've fallen a few times, maybe like yellow belt, green belt, you're like, grappling on concrete, that sounds kind of scary. Like, oh god, I don't want to get hip thrown slammed into the concrete. But then you get up, a little further along in your training, and now I'm back to like that square one, which is like, man, I really don't want to get hip thrown into the concrete. I better really pull out all the stops and make sure, make sure I don't get slammed into the ground. Um, it just changes. It totally changes the way that you're interacting with the people around you and the way that you're training, just in general. Um, this is a little bit of a leap, but I do like this question a lot. So a lot of the retreat is focused on connecting to the mountain, connecting to the people on the mountain, and connecting to just the natural environment up there. So this is a little bit vague, but I think we can really get something out of this one. What role does nature play in your personal teaching philosophy, especially during the retreats, like the one way retreat? What role does nature play?
Well, maybe I can weave this question together a little bit with the last question. So the last question
Yes.
was talking about, how do you adapt curriculum to the space? And one of the hardest things to adapt is obviously forms. Doing forms
Yes.
on uneven surface or a small space can be very challenging. There's obviously things you can do. You can take your time and, kind of adapt your footing to the uneven surface a little bit, and you can kind of backstep as you step forward to accommodate a smaller space. But one of the most beautiful things you can do with your form when you're in that kind of environment is to adapt it to the environment. And one of the
Mm,
exercises we
mm.
do at the retreat is we do creative forms in a certain area. So it's like, this is your space. Make a form that fits this shape. And you would be blown away by the beauty of some of those forms and the things that people come up with. Um, and I think, kind of getting to the second question here, what role does nature play in teaching?
Mm, mm,
I think it teaches us a lot. You know, there was a form at the retreat um, a few years back called Squirrel Power, and the the individual in question ended up, taking that as a sort of moniker because he learned so much from that squirrel. And it was interesting because I feel like that squirrel sort of embodied his own nature.
Mm,
And the form he put together was sort of frenetic, um, but in a kind of beautiful way. And it utilized, breaking, certain twigs off and certain trees down and that were placed in certain positions. And, uh, you know, he ended up coming back a year later and doing his form in the exact same spot. And for him, I think, sort of solidified that space as a place
mm,
of learning
mm,
and growth. And it, I think that's something that nature can do is it can connect you to something deeper. I think one of the reasons why people turn to religion and faith is because it's very deep, it's very ancient, it's very vast. Um, well, nature is very deep and ancient and vast in the same
mm,
way. And when you can connect yourself to it, whether it's with a squirrel on a tree or with, the sound of the wind in the air or this certain arrangement of trees and shrubs, it can be a powerful experience. If you look at a lot of the forms or a lot of the techniques, they draw reference to animals or to plants, was a sallow shape block or, you know, tiger claw or dragon tail kick. We romanticize nature, and I think we do it because it's very human to do so. And um, I think when we lean into nature, it makes everything more powerful. It
mm.
has almost a built-in spirituality to it.
Yes, sir. I feel like we could do a whole episode or even series of episodes about that concept, about how the natural world influences training and how the elements of nature, I mean, even the pathways are all based around natural elements, these kind of things. And it really is deeply imbued into the discipline and
Well,
how we train. Yes, sir.
think about since the dawn of time, every civilization has been drawing upon natural references, whether it's, bears or plants or
Mm,
whatever. And even to this day, we probably never lived in a more unnatural world than we do now. And yet we still look to nature for a lot of our references and wisdom. And I think that's because there's this sort of primal desire to connect with the natural world.
yes, sir. Yes, sir. So speaking of that, um, that is kind of like moving into what is there and accessible to us out in a more natural environment. Maybe it's a little bit different from being in the dojang. But on the opposite end of that, there are the obstacles that nature presents. And we've kind of touched on this a little bit already, but maybe just to get more specific with it, I have some thoughts about this question, but I'll ask you first. How can instructors use obstacles in their environment, such as walls, uneven ground, or weather? That's a great story to
Mhm.
teach deeper principles. To teach deeper principles.
Well, I mean, I don't want to reveal all the secrets of the retreat, but I think this might be a good opportunity to tell a story. We went on something called the Endurance Walk, which was all about, pushing ourselves and testing our limits. And it just so happened that almost every year, actually, that we've done it, there's been a great downpour. But one year in particular, it was raining sideways and lightning coming down from the sky. And it was just, and we were all waterlogged in our uniforms. And oh, it just made it so much better. It was literally a blessing in disguise. And I think obstacles are put there to be overcome.
Mm,
Some people look at obstacles and get frustrated and say, why me? Why was this obstacle placed in front of me? That person over there doesn't have an obstacle, and that's why they're getting ahead of me. The truth is that person's got just as many obstacles as you, but they're
Mm,
just better at overcoming them. And even if there is some disparity in, your plight, take that difficulty and turn it into a blessing by seeing it as an obstacle to be overcome. And in overcoming, you will grow stronger, and the next obstacle will become easier. And once it's not about what you're given, it's about what you do with what you've been given.
mm.
And I honestly think as a teacher, it's like my job to put obstacles in front of you and then help you get over them. And when you learn how to do that, it doesn't matter if it's martial arts or something else, you're going to have the
Mm.
skills you need to overcome.
Yes, sir. This is something that we've been working on a lot with the kids at the youth center is just that whole idea, because we were talking a little bit beforehand about just the nurture versus not even nature versus nurture, but just the amount of nurturing and I mean, it kind of is like babying that is happening in a lot of institutions, school, public school being one of them. I think in a lot of ways that's happening. And it's not every public school and certainly not totally pervasive, but, as somebody who works with all ages of children, quite often, you can see just the way that something as simple as waiting in line becomes whoa, I've been waiting for 45 minutes, and you're like, you're complaining about nothing, you're complaining about nothing. And you're, I think what I often see, to get more to the point, is when obstacles are created out of nothing, like you're already having a hard time with something that I really see as a non-obstacle. Just wait until I put an actual obstacle in your path, like, and I do it from time to time when I'm working with the kids, and it kind of brings about this cognitive dissonance where they have to very quickly break apart and then put themselves back together. Just to give a quick story, we were walking today in a line, as I was mentioning beforehand, and at a certain point, the back of the line got disconnected from the front of the line. So I just started walking erratically, kind of like the snake game, like that you would play on your phone or on the computer. And the front line is following me, and we get to this little kind of like loop, and I start walking around the loop. And as I'm getting back close to where I started the loop, the back of the line is finally catching up. But it got
Mm,
to the point where the back of the line was facing me, and the rest of the line was behind me. And
mm.
they were like, oh God, like, what do we do? What do we do? Because we have a rule. We have a rule that they are not allowed to go in front of me and they're not allowed to go behind the staff member at the back of the line. And so I saw the kids like, are we in front of him or behind him? Like they just started to like panic a little bit. And I was like, they were like, do we walk past? Like, and I just said, go around the loop, go around the loop. And they were like, okay, okay, okay. Like they started to panic a little bit, but this is just, it's a little play, like I'm creating a not real obstacle and it's just like something, but even that amount of like pressure on some of the kids is almost too much. They're like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And I'm like, wow, like, as you said, sir, like, this is my job. Like, this is my job. Because if you guys continue to grow up and this is the kind of thing that gets you flustered, like, you're going to have a really hard time going to the grocery store. You're going to have a really hard time, um, being stuck in traffic or whatever it is. Like,
Yeah.
we're going to start building our resilience a little bit to inconsistency or to the obstacles in front of us. Um,
I mean, not to belabor that point too much, but of course I feel similarly. And I don't think it's anyone's fault. I think, our society has been getting better and better and better. And because of that, we have had to face less and less adversity. And that's going to make us, we're designed to be anti-fragile. So the more adversity we face, the better we get at facing it. And so when things get kind of manicured for us and very safe and secure, we get used to that and we want to stay in that environment. But it's, I was just talking to my kids about allergies and like, why do we get allergies? Blah, blah. And like, why do people in America get allergies more than in Korea? And I had to kind of unfortunately tell them, well, Korea's a little bit dirtier, honestly. And because of that, it's because of our clean environment that we start to lose the ability to deal with some of those toxins.
Mm, mm,
And I think emotionally, we are the same way. Like if we lived in a world where, roving gangs were coming in and like murdering people in the town and this kind of thing, like a lot of the stuff that we worry about right now would go out the window. We would think that's nothing to be concerned about. Like we have way bigger problems. And while I'm very happy we live in the world we live in, it falls to each and every one of us to try to put those obstacles in front of us so that we
mm,
can stay strong. It's the reason why everyone is overweight these days is because we don't have to work out like we used to. We don't have to run away from the jaguar and, hunt down the animal. We can sit around and watch TV and live a good life. So those calories we put into our body that we know we want because our taste buds crave them has no way of going out of our body
mm,
unless
mm,
we push ourselves to get up every day and do some exercise. Um, So, kind of coming back on track with what we were orbiting, I think those obstacles are important and they're a feature of our environment. And if our environment isn't giving us the obstacles we need, then we should go and seek them out.
mm. Yes, sir. I think that's a huge, huge point is going out and seeking the obstacles. Um, that's something that I've been feeling, not to go off on too much of a tangent here, but with video games in the past couple of years, I just haven't been playing as many video games because a lot of the games that I played were these kind of survival-y games and just things where like it it doesn't even really matter what game I was playing, but it got to the point where I would face an obstacle in the game and I would just feel kind of like, I kind of want to go run around in the woods. Like I kind of want to go like be more uncomfortable than I am right now. And I think that comes from my martial arts training because these are almost like mental and emotional obstacles that I'm dealing with when I'm playing a game, but there's no like physical,
Mm,
like there's nothing really happening. But when I go to come back to the fear of heights, when I go climb a really tall tree, like that's all right. Now I'm what seems like something very simple can be a hugely impactful experience. That was one of the
yeah.
first things I did when I got back up north. I was in Ohio visiting my family, and we were all kind of sitting around and just enjoying our time. And I was like, "Oh, there's something I got to do. I have to make sure I do before I head out. I'm gonna go climb one of those big trees out there." And my family was like, "Okay, whatever," because I grew up climbing big tall trees, but where we lived in Texas, the trees were different. Anyway, I got out there and I started climbing, and sure enough, I get halfway up, and I'm like, "Ooh, yeah, it's been a little while since I've climbed a tall tree." And I started getting nervous, and I was like, "All right, let me just do one more branch." And then I would just sit and settle and like remind myself that I'm sturdy, I'm okay, I'm connected to the tree, and you just keep going. I think that's a really maybe a powerful symbol for what it's like to overcome those obstacles. Is sometimes you can be faced with something that seems really scary or really intense, but really the ground underneath you, that foundation underneath you, is a lot stronger than you think, and
Mm.
it'll just take going through it or overcoming it, and then you look back and you say, "Oh, I was actually pretty okay most of that time."
Mhm.
um, and that's a huge lesson that seems to be a common theme here that you don't get without putting yourself outside of your comfort zone and going for it.
You were talking about how there's only so much you can learn sort of cerebrally. At some point, you have to get your hands in
Yes.
there and like mold the clay and like feel the sweat on your body and there's so many lessons that can be learned from the physical doing of something. I talk a lot about the story of the hare and how martial arts really aren't about fighting. They start that way, but then they become much deeper. But if you remove the fighting aspect, they might feel hollow as well. It's that
Mm,
interplay between the two. I'm reminded of, what I know of the Shaolin monks and how, they were taught they started out meditating to Buddha, and then it became so much more. They were taught these breathing exercises that became, Qigong and Kung Fu. And, some people say the reason why they turned to martial arts is that they could defend their temples, and fight off bandits and the wildlife. But to me, I think maybe some application for fighting off bandits, but very limited application for fighting like a tiger. But the reason why it's so powerful for a monk is that physicality connects them to their body.
mm,
And whether it was martial arts or more like yoga, whatever, some kind of physical training is really important for all people to get very deep inside their mind. I think there's a duality between those two things, between
yes, yes.
athletics and academics, between the mind and the body. And, trying to take this back to the environment, I think the environment that you're in when you're learning can teach you very different things. So if you are sitting in front of a computer, just kind of rote memorizing information, you're going to learn a lot differently than if you are out in the wilderness dodging sticks and climbing through small places. That's going to teach you a totally different level, a different way of sort of navigating adversity.
Mm, yes.
So when we're putting together our training environment, we should keep that in mind, I think.
So, in on the topic of putting together the training environment, kind of getting back into the larger theme here, what advice would you give to a new instructor who might feel restricted by their training environment or their training space?
I would look at those restrictions as obstacles to be overcome.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So if, for example, you really want to practice more grappling, but your school it just has hardwood floor, or you're training on carpet, train grappling on hardwood floor or carpet, and you will learn a lot more than other people. You will
Uh,
maybe have to adapt some of the things that you're doing and be a little more careful in certain ways, but overall, you're going to probably, in some ways, become a better grappler than someone who didn't train under those
mm,
difficult situations.
we were just talking about that today and how where I'm training now, I've had to think about this quite a lot. Because at the beginning, my initial impulse, kind of coming from the Dojang at Rising Phoenix, I was like, oh, this space that I have feels limited. But the more that I've been digging into it, the more that I'm like, oh no, I got everything I need here. Like, would it be nice to have this? Would it be nice to, like, yes, of course, but what do we really need to train martial arts? We need our bodies and we need ideally another person. Like that's great. That's going to be very helpful. But otherwise, I totally, and I'm finding that it's so true. Like, just get in there and go for it and go for it. And obviously, I'm not going to just throw all the students into these highly precarious, dangerous situations. I'm not going to do like dive rolls on the concrete day one, but
Sure.
um, I was telling you, like my first couple of weeks there on the hardwood floor, I hadn't really rolled much on hardwood floors, and so I was just practicing my rolls, and I was like, "Yeah, you know what that taught me? I really need to work on my rolls because I could feel like, yep, I hit right there, and I hit right there, and I hit right there, and I hit like it wasn't very smooth,
Oh,
and that was I feel fortunate to be in that position as somebody who's been training for a little while now to have that experience and immediately turn back on myself and go, oh, Jesse, you got to work on your roles. That was not a good role. If it was a good role, you would feel nothing at all. It was,
exactly.
and
Exactly.
I think
Yeah.
it's going to be so fun to keep exploring that, just training with what we've got and then iterating from there and saying, oh, you know what kind of worked, but you know it would be fun, and just keeping it fun and keeping it light. And like you said, like if I go in and I'm pointing out every route in the way or every spot that you could slip, all the students are going to come in and they're going to go, well, I don't want to move. I don't want to do anything. But if I'm just kind of like, I don't know, everybody have a seat on the ground. They'd be like, okay, all right, we're doing shrimping down the floor. Well, the floor's kind of dirty. Oh yeah, I haven't cleaned it yet today. So clean it. We'll work on it. We'll work on it. But
Speaking of difficult environments and trying to adapt, when I learned how to use weapons, I was always training in big gymnasiums with high ceilings. And then
oh
we
yes.
decided to have a weapons program here at Rescue Base Martial Arts. And when I built the building, they put these fans in that are very low hanging.
Mm.
And it bothered me to no end. And I tried to get them to shorten them, but they couldn't. And so we've just been stuck with these kind of low hanging fans. And I got to be honest, like there's been times when I'm like, do we even do weapons? Because it's such a difficult space to navigate without hitting those fans. And the very first time I taught a class, I think I like hit the fan like right away, with the sword. And I was like, oh my God, I look like such an idiot. But I never thought about above because in most spaces you're in, if you're in like a good training center, is a lot of space above. So you just like, you think about the power you're generating, but you're not thinking about hitting something straight up on top of you. But over the last 10 years working in this space, I've thought a lot about that now.
Mm.
And I'm constantly like kind of looking for where the fans are and how can I navigate them as I'm attacking. And to be honest with you, there may be environments that I find myself in that's going to be very important knowledge to have. If I was, I mean, I doubt I'm going to be fighting for my life with a sword, but like hypothetically, like, if you were in medieval times and you had a sword and you were inside of a small building, fighting in that space would be very different than fighting outside. And so having that knowledge of your environment could be very valuable.
Yes, sir. And transferring that to the open hand, you know, if I get assailed in a hallway, I'm not going to necessarily be throwing spinning hook kicks, at least my spinning hook kicks, because they
Hmm.
take up a little more space than they probably need to.
Yeah.
But right, like yeah, like I'm not if I I don't know. I just this is a really
Exactly.
weird image, but if I'm like up in the attic and there's a raccoon in the attic, I'm like, all right, well, I'm prone and I guess it's going to have to be like, spear hands or something. I got to just go straight lines. Um, but that's
Well,
the kind of stuff.
there's a reason why pole arms aren't used inside and why knives
Yes.
are better for close quarters. I mean, you come up to it very intimately when you're trying to use a sword and there's fans hanging down and you're
Yeah.
realizing, oh, this is a tight enclosed space that's not really designed for such a large weapon. Not that our school studio is very tight and enclosed. I mean, we have a lot of space, but it's just that those fans are kind of low.
And that's the kind of stuff that just pushes you into the great technical questions, which is, I mean, one of the great joys of training for myself. And, I've learned through training under you for so many years for you as well. It's just like, oh, yeah, what if we were doing this in this place? Or like, you know, uh, that we play up at the retreat, not to go too deep into that because they are kind of a surprise, but like those limiting games where it's like, let's do this, but
Mm.
you can only do it in this way. And then it's like, oh my, it's like a whole new world. Very fun, very fun. On that topic there, we already touched on this a little bit, but anything else specifically to say about how those environments influence our mindset, our focus, and emotional engagement? We've talked a lot about kind of mindset and focus. How if I'm swinging a weapon in a place with a low ceiling, my focus is in a very different place, right? If I'm doing footwork on wet grass, my focus is in a very different place. Um, but maybe we can touch on the emotional impact of training in a different environment. You had alluded to earlier the difference in the physicality of maybe a more rough and tumble school with like three guys on the mats and they're all pretty gruff and it's like, yeah, we're gonna get into it. But there's absolutely an emotional component to that as well. um, what have you found is a good mixture of environmental factors to get the right kind of emotion in a student to do the work that needs to be done, like for that class or for that environment or for that curriculum?
Yeah,
Sorry.
no, that's a really good question, and I think it requires a little subtlety to unravel because I think ultimately what we're trying to do is take people to the edge and then hold them from falling off, you know?
Mm, mm,
So we're trying to like push people basically as far as they can go, but not too much further because we don't want them to get hurt. We say at Rising Phoenix Martial Arts, keep one foot in the fire. If you put 2 feet in the fire, you're gonna get like immolated, but you want to jump in a little bit and then jump out. You want to live in a safe and secure environment, but you always want to be pushing yourself
mm, mm,
to face adversity. And I never had a lot of trouble in, the 90s and stuff, like pushing in early 2000s, like pushing people into challenging situations. People just embraced it. We're like, yeah, this is great. But these days, and actually my challenge at that time was just almost pulling people back a little bit. These
mm,
days, my
mm,
problem is getting people to go forward into those challenging situations. And I think in order to do that, you have to have a couple of things. You have to be kind of patient with people, but you also have to be assertive and you have to
mm. Yes, assertive.
develop a good relationship with them of trust so that they'll trust you enough to kind of follow you into that adversity. And then you've got to tell them to pull back when it gets a little too much and give them
Mm,
the opportunity to do that. But like I said, it's a challenging situation. It's more of an art than a science. And because it's so difficult, things can go wrong from time to time. So it takes a lot of faith, trust, and understanding. I'm going to get it wrong a few times. They're going to get it wrong a few times. But we both have each other's best interests at heart. We both care a lot. And ultimately, I'm just trying to build you up to be the best that you can be as the instructor.
yes, sir. Yes,
Um,
sir. Being able to be aware of that and carry that as the instructor too is just like it's like the most important thing, because if your instructor is pushing you out into doing these things and they're doing it not from a place of empathy, not from a place of like I'm going to bring you to the edge and be right there with you, but instead just like, oh, let's see if you fall off the edge. Like that's a very different instructional practice. It's very
yeah.
different. And I think I've seen people as we've gone out to competition and these kind of things where I see sometimes instructors who I say, wow, okay, that instructor might have just let that person fall off the edge. And now I'm not really sure what I'm looking at, but I mean, one, they don't look like they're having fun.
Mhm.
Two, they look very emotionally disturbed almost, when you see some of those things. And it is, like you said, really nuanced and quite a fine line to tread. And that kind of ties into that forgiveness that we've been talking about quite often recently, which is just like, yeah, I mean, we're going to try this together. And the key word is together. It's not
Yeah.
an adversarial relationship. It's
Mhm.
we're in this both learning and growing. And, you know, I hopefully as an instructor just have a little more experience doing these kind of things than you might have experienced, or maybe I have a different take on it. Um, this is an interesting question, and it's actually something I think quite a lot about. And I'm curious before I share my thoughts on this. What do you think about this one? What environmental elements do you intentionally incorporate when designing a training experience? So the environmental elements that are intentionally incorporated. I guess another way to ask this is what has to be there? What
Yeah.
has to be there?
Well, it kind of would start with the what is the objective of the training? So if this
Yes.
is somebody who's very new, then it's really important that there are iterative steps that you're learning the first basic principles and then adding on to it. So instead of teaching you this 10 technique combination that has a lot of advanced kicks and punches in it, I might take you by the hand and show you how to do just the first technique, how to
Mm,
chamber your leg, how to pivot, how to extend, and just work on that first kick. And then once you get that first kick, add the second kick, the third kick. Now, if it's somebody who is, maybe cocky and has been training for a little while and needs to be sort of humble because I just saw them working with some students and they were like acting like they knew everything, then maybe I would throw them the whole 10 kick combination from the start and then they would be kind of flopping around trying to do some of the combination in the middle and at the end. And then
mm,
from that experience, I could go back and break it down into pieces and kind of show them that. And it would be a profound learning experience from a different angle. Um, and I only make that reference not to belabor that point, but to show that teaching and learning are quite artistic. And it really, you have to see what's the problem and how, and solve it with techniques that are relevant to that issue.
yes,
So,
sir.
I think, kind of getting back to, the environment, it just depends on, you know, what are we trying to teach? And then I will structure an environment that will help them grow in the ways they need to grow.
Mm, mm,
If they're just learning how to do a kick, then doing it on a padded surface is a great place to start. Now, for someone like you, I'd be like, let's go out into the parking lot and work on our dive rolls, but I definitely
yes.
would not say, hey, white belt, first day of class, go do dive roll. That's just, he's going to break his neck, he's going to
Oh
smash his
my
head,
gosh. That is, I will never forget. This is, sorry to jump in here, but you just see a lot of fun and exciting things when you're teaching classes. And I'll just never forget. I just watched this one kid in class. Everybody was doing great on their roles and like everybody was looking good. And even this kid, he was looking okay. And I just watched him get in line and he was looking at the ground and he was looking at his hands and he just dove just straight into the ground. And I was like, I just remember I was like, oh my God. I was like, oh my. And then he got right up and he was like, ow. And I was like, yeah, ow. Like, okay, don't do like that again. But anyway, that you just saying dive rolls reminded me of that moment where I was like, whoa. But then, I mean, that's the thing about the students at Rising Phoenix is he was like, "Oh, that didn't work." I just slammed my head into the ground, and he got back up and he got back in line, and he changed it the next time. He tried something a little bit different. And I was like, "Hey, good job, man. You figured out one more way uh, to not do it." Right, so let's check that one off the list.
We
And
were talking about like when is it right to be confident and when is it right to be like cautious and there's definitely we were talking about fear of heights and the wobbly knees and how we want to get rid of that so that we can be confident at the ledge overlooking a great drop. Well, we also can be overconfident and I think that's a great example of like being overconfident to the point you're going to hurt yourself and I think he probably learned a great lesson that day when he fell on his head. It's like, okay, I don't know how to do this technique, so I'm going to go a little slower this next time.
yes, yes,
Mhm.
yes, sir.
Well, what do you think about that? What environmental elements do you intentionally incorporate when designing a training experience?
So I'm going to take it maybe a little bit in a different direction here because as a musician, I'm constantly thinking about the sounds around me and like what a place sounds like and how that influences the feeling of that place. And recently, this is, I don't know if this might be a little synesthetic kind of like blending of senses, but color has been meaning a lot to me, like in
Mm.
a place. And maybe it's because the colors at the youth center are just very loud. They're very loud. And like when I first got there, all the walls are just these bright, loud colors. And I was like, wow, this is very aggressive for me. And I'm like an adult who can kind of manage different types of environments. And so it's got to be just lighting the kids up, for them to come in here and just be like, wow, it's very, very aggressive color. And so I've been thinking a lot about the sensory environment from
Mm.
from a general point of view. So not necessarily thinking specific training, which I totally agree with everything you said on the specific training. Well, what are we training, and that's going to
Yeah.
influence the environment. But generally, I'm looking at my environment, and I think the Dojang Rising Phoenix does such a great job of this. And it's the thing that people say every time they walk through the door. They said, "I just walked in and it felt good. It felt right. It felt like it was warm and it was welcoming and it was like a very friendly, homey environment. The carpet in the lobby and the chairs with the nice cloth cushions and the leather couch and like the wooden front desk, like these kind of things, they really do make at least a subconscious impact. But for somebody who's looking at those things, they make a conscious impact and say, wow, okay, the color choice here was really great. Lots of neutral tones, kind of natural tones, the white and the tan and the gray of the mats, and I think that the overall effect of that emotionally, if you took the opposite, you know, and thinking even outside the building, there's loud, aggressive music playing and you're walking up and then you walk in and like the lights are low and maybe it's just like a very different environment. You're going to walk in immediately on edge, and that's going to like seep out into every single person that you're training with. And it's all going to feel like, a little more,
Yeah, like
a little more
mo
feral, a little more like,
I think you're onto something.
mm,
Starbucks, I read this book called The Starbucks Experience, which I
yes,
reference a
yes.
lot, and in that they talked about, the design of Starbucks and why it was became such a viral sensation. And really, it wasn't the cup of coffee; it was everything that was around the cup of coffee. It was the
Yes, yes.
environment that they created where you felt safe. It didn't matter where you were in the world. If there was a Starbucks and you walked in there, it felt like a safe and warm environment where you
Mm,
could sit down, read a book, have a cup of coffee, have a conversation with a friend. And they talked a lot about color and how like browns and dimmer lights, cooler air conditioning can create this environment that just feels very safe and quiet. And I think you're right. Like if you get too many colors going on, I mean, you can feel it as an adult walking in there. Imagine a
yes.
kid who is much lower in their brainstem, like how they feel. Like they feel it, they can't even articulate it. And it's the same reason why, a lot of Taekwondo schools they have red and blue mats and they have a lot of cartoon imagery and I didn't do any of that with our school.
Mm,
I have
mm,
gray mats and green carpet and, tan walls and everything is very earthy because I wanted to create this feeling of seriousness for our
yes,
school.
yes.
And I think it's all part of that wet blanket that's made our students very serious. We have very serious students. Um, and it's not just the environment, but that's a good staging for the work that we do to
Mm.
create that environment.
Yes, sir. So that's what I would say maybe to that question. I could certainly go deeper into that in terms of so many things that you have shared with us over the years about tone, inflection of voice, how you actually communicate the lesson. But um, the environment itself, it's got to feel right. It's got to feel good. until you intentionally make sure that it doesn't, right? And that's presenting that obstacle where, maybe one day people walk in and they've been used to walking in and seeing something a certain way, and then you just throw a wrench in the whole thing, and they're like, I don't really know how to feel about this. And you say, great, let's talk about that today. Let's dive into that a little bit. And I think coming back to the retreat a little bit, that is like one of the big beauties of the retreat is you go out there and you're like, oh, we're like really out here and we're really doing this, and you're
Mhm.
like, yeah, we are, right? It's kind of crazy, kind of fun, isn't it? And that's one of my favorite things, being out at the retreat and seeing the progression over the week
Mhm.
from day one, which is kind of like, like kind of like jittery, like, oh, what's gonna happen? And then midway through the week, everybody's like, this is very real, isn't it? And you're like, yeah, it's very real. And then at the latter half of the week, everybody's just kind of like, whoa,
Destroyed.
right? Well, like, what's it gonna be like to go back to where I came from, like before this, And it's like, and everything feels kind of different. Everything feels very different after you come back after that experience. That kind of leads us into the last question here. How can students learn to use their environment outside of class, at home, at work, or in daily life to reinforce their martial arts practice? I love this question because it's something I feel like you, from the very beginning of my training, imparted to me and to all of your students, is like, this doesn't stop when you bow out. Like, this is always, always going on throughout your life. And yeah, so what would you say to students who might be struggling with taking that
I think
into
it's
the
like
world?
Mr. Miyagi's lessons that he taught Daniel's son, waxing
Yes.
the car, painting the fence. Everything you do in your life can be martial artified. And if you think of your chores as exercises to make you stronger, to make you better,
Mm, mm.
they will make you stronger and better.
Yes, sir.
Take your environment with you.
Yes, sir.
Um,
Absolutely.
what
I
about your
think,
thoughts on that? Any closing remarks? We've gone on for, that's the problem when just the two of us get together, we'll talk for like 5 hours. But
yes, sir. No, I think that's a great place to end, is be aware of your environment and then take your environment with you, right? And I think maybe the last thing I would add to that is, if your environment isn't, uh, how best to say this, I would say, yeah, just start paying attention to your environment more. Yeah, yeah, like everything around you, there's a lesson. There's a lesson. There's a lesson. And right, whether it's, I mean, I'm looking at the couch right now. Like, all right, how would it feel to be thrown onto the couch? How would it feel to like jump off the couch and do a kick? And so it just becomes this improvisational game of like, hmm, how can I train with everything that's around me? And I think a great question to ask is, what's the thing around me right now that makes me the most uncomfortable? And can I move into that? Can I move toward that? One of my favorite pieces of advice that you gave me, that, if I remember correctly, was passed on to you from Grandmaster Quan, was, if you're ever stuck on what to do next, you just take the worst thing and make it your best. You take the worst thing. And I've been doing that a lot just in my life recently, with technique, but also just with other things. If I have noticed a trend of like having a hard time doing the dishes, I'm like, all right, I'm becoming the dish master. Like I will, I will become the ultimate dishwasher. And through that process, great. Now I'm washing dishes and I notice another thing and I say, oh man, you know, I keep looking at the trash and thinking I need to take it out, but then I don't do it. You know what? I'm going to become the ultimate trash man, and you go, and so it builds and it builds and it builds and it builds and it builds. So that was not as succinct as yours, but
Oh,
it's,
no, that's great. I mean, the reason why that works so well
it's so
is
good. It's,
if
it's like,
it forces us to face our biggest fears and do the hardest things for us to do. And if we try to live in a world of security, we will live in an ever shrinking world of fear. And
Mm,
so, whatever you do well now, it's gonna get smaller over time if you're never trying to push those boundaries. And so you'll just live in an ever shrinking world until everything is cut off from you. Like imagine the far, far distant future of the galaxy where or the universe where everything is you can't even see any of the stars because they've all drifted away. That's
mm,
what your life is going to be like. It's just going to be darkness. But if you constantly try to reach out and pull those stars closer and engage with them, even though they might be a little terrifying, your night sky is going to be
mm.
brilliant and bright.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I think that's a great place to wrap up.
Yes, sir. All right. Well, thank you for joining us today.
Yes, sir. That wraps up episode 11. We have been on a streak of the One Way podcast. Remember, your environment isn't just where you train, it is part of how you train. Whether you're in a polished studio or standing barefoot in the grass, every space has something to teach you if you're willing to listen. Thank you again, sir, for sharing your insight, and thank you all, our listeners, for tuning in. Stay present, stay adaptable, and stay on the one way.
If you enjoyed that podcast, please consider liking and subscribing to our YouTube channel, as well as hitting the notification bell.